Morning.
Hello. Hi, Stephen. How are you doing?
Not bad, you?
All right, fine. Thank you very much indeed. Just trying to catch up with the day. Can't believe it's 11 o'clock already.
I know, and a Friday.
And a Friday. But the Friday bit's good, really.
It is.
Opportunity to have a bit of a relax.
Yeah, made it 2 Fridays, always good.
Yeah. Have we met? Forgive me. Have we met before? Have you in the last meeting or?
Yes. Yeah. I do so many committees in these meetings. I lose track of who, what, where, why, and when sometimes.
Who, what, where? Okay. So I'm Alex Oldman. I'm the well, I'm supposed to be the team leader for the operations group.
Oh, okay.
For this year and last year. So I work for Civica. We're a software provider for social housing people, amongst other things. What do you do?
So I'm compliance manager for Swegon in the UK. So my background is fire safety for ventilation equipment.
Brilliant. Very useful. And are you guys doing much with BIM or fiery type data sets, or is that for the future?
No, we have BIM models already for the various fire products, but yeah, I was involved with BIM back in 2011 with the CIBSI BIM steering group after Paul Morell's famous presentation.
Okay, I don't know about Paul Morell's famous presentation.
Oh, this was the whole thing about government projects over 5 million being using level 2 BIM.
Oh yes, right. Okay. Which obviously everybody does, so that's okay.
Yes. and then I've just through I think either Paul White or Paul McSolly have ended up in this group.
Okay. Oh, excellent. Very good. Hi, Paul. Hi, Will. Welcome, both of you.
Hi, good morning, guys. You okay?
Yeah, we're all right. We're doing okay. Mr. Freer, how are you doing?
You're on mute, Richard.
Hey, somebody.
There's always one, isn't there?
Even more popular than it ever was. That's the crack.
Yes.
You're on mute.
It works, yeah.
Good.
We've had over the last couple of days, we've had a bit of trouble with people getting on to the teams, some of the teams, but some people getting on to some of the teams meetings. So it'll be interesting if there's a problem with this. It's a technical thing with teams. I don't really understand what's going on.
Okay.
Has anybody else had a problem?
I had to switch to my active plan login, which was interesting. I don't normally
That's
have to do that.
Somebody said that yesterday, Alex.
Yeah. I haven't needed to do that for a while, so I don't know if it's an authentication thing.
Yeah, it's a weird thing, isn't it?
So I'm logged into Teams on my browser and my company Teams, and I'm on your one in here. So
I did the same.
Oh, there we go. Welcome. People are slowly coming in, or quite quickly coming in. Obviously, the floodgates have opened. Welcome, everyone.
So Callum, did you have to come in through the active plan one as well?
No, I tried to come in through the active plan one, but I had to give up and then go back to my company one. So I restarted Teams and then just came in without switching, which was painless.
Right. Okay. That's really weird. We need to look at that. Get just to look at that, Richard, I think.
Yeah.
George, it happened on another forum I'm a member of as well.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so I think it's just something within Teams rather than something to do with active plan.
Yeah. Okay.
Cool. Okay. Well, shall we? Yeah,
I think we can kick off. Do we want to record? Oh, we are recording.
We do.
Oh, yeah. Crikey! We're being recorded already. Okay. Right. Well, welcome to meeting 2 for BIM4Housing operations, and we are going to take the opportunity to run through. I've only got a couple of agenda items, which I'm quite happy for other people to to propose or suggest other items. Mr. Freer normally at this point has got some hidden items. I think George wants to table something as well. But I just thought, I guess what I want to do is two things. First of all, just share with you a little news from what I see as the world that I operate in, which isn't necessarily the same as the worlds that you operate in, which is one of the most exciting bits about working in this particular area. And then I think we can have a bit of a discussion, but some general updates from what's happening. So I'm just going to share my screen really quickly for this. This is going to take all of 5 minutes. And if you want to suggest other items you want to put up for discussion, if you want to pop them into chat, then we can come around to those. Just put a quick one-line comment in. We'll come on to those. And forgive me if Jis or Richard or George want to add anything at this point. Should be able to see my screen, which should say from our world, but that's really my world rather than anybody else's. So a quick couple of things that I just wanted to mention from a sort of general industry news scanning perspective. And the world I'm coming from is that of social housing asset management, looking at what's happening in the industry, and then we'll focus specifically on the areas that we're interested in, golden thread, information models, so on and so forth in a little bit. So the first thing is, obviously we've got a new minister in charge of the Department for Levelling Up Community and Housing, Mr. Michael Gove, and he's now going to require qualifications. So the suggestion is that using the framework of the forthcoming regulation of social housing, what is a bill at the moment, they're going to require executive directors, board members, managers and senior managers in organisations to achieve professional qualifications. Quite what that means, nobody's quite sure, but I've rushed off and become a member of the Chartered Institute of Housing in the last 3 weeks, on the off chance that they might be able to help me with some qualifications along the way. And there might be...
Alex, is that just for social housing, or does it include people who've got tower blocks that are private?
No, so it won't. The regulation of social housing bill will just be for social housing, so it won't be for private landlords, but it'll be through that framework that it's delivered. And the idea is targeting local authorities and housing associations in the provision of social housing with that requirement. So level 3 and level 4 qualifications are going to be required, but again, we're not quite sure what qualifications, but as long as we're qualified, that's okay. So I think the devil's in the detail in this point, but the idea is to make sure that we're moving towards professional standards. And I do like this idea, because if we equate what's happening here with, say, the world of finance, you can't talk finance unless you're talking to an independent financial advisor or somebody who's qualified with relevant knowledge, and so if we're talking about matters of building safety, fire safety, and the provision of services generally speaking, of a good quality of housing in the UK, then I think this can only be a good thing, that we're going to be working to common standards, even if it's a low standard at the beginning. And so yeah, maybe more on that in just a bit, but it'd be interesting to see if that's something you're aware of, if that's something you're concerned about as professionals in this sector, or if it's what your own personal plans might be. Feel free to comment or put something in the chat on that particular point. Right, so next up is a merger. So we all love a merger. Now, I think this is particularly interesting because now is not a good time to be merging, for a variety of different reasons. But Sovereign and Network Homes are coming together to form a potentially 82,000 home organisation, and that's against the backdrop of several other mergers having been attempted in the last, say, 6 months, that have either stalled or bumped along the bottom before making tremendous progress. Also, the sort of financing for merger is more difficult, but perhaps organisations are seeking greater efficiencies by moving to larger scales. So this in itself brings together some interesting ideas about what we do from a data perspective for this, this merged organisation. How might they exchange data? And I think that's common to the sort of information standards that we might be interested in talking about here, and just generally about the portability of data in our sector, because everything's very bespoke, perhaps to an individual project, let alone within an organisation, within a social landlord. So it's interesting that that's happened, and we'll see what comes out of it. And just a point to make. This is another Gove initiative. So Michael Gove in England and in Wales is rattling people's sabres, especially on the developers, trying to get developers to agree to remediate problems on buildings, signing up to some sort of pact or accord to say that they're going to be responsible for remediation of problems that have occurred. I'm not going to name and shame the organisations who are not signed up at the moment. I know that there are several have indicated that they are intending to sign but hadn't signed by the deadlines, which were mid-March. And the carrot is sign up and it'll be good for you. The stick is if you don't, then you won't be winning new development activity for social housing in the UK. So they're going to stop the award of contracts to these organisations. So that's an interesting angle on things. So I just think, generally speaking, Mr. Gove's arrival at the Department for Levelling Up has had a bit of a gear change for the industry, and he's certainly coming at it hard compared with some of his predecessors. However your politics may play, I think that's only good for the sector. And I'm not saying that I'm a Gove fan at all, unless he's on the call, in which case, hello, Mr. Gove. The last thing I really wanted to mention was any day now, in fact, possibly in 2 or 3 days' time, next week, the new register for buildings is going to be officially opened, and the process by which data is going to be required to register buildings with the new regulator is a process starting in April and running through until October. So from again, an information standards and governance perspective, we need to be aware that customers, organisations, I keep on saying customers, housing associations and local authorities are going to need to be lodging sets of information with the regulator. Obviously, there's been those that have gone through the pilot process already, so may have established those data requirements, but we're going to look out for some further guidance popping out, I expect, early next week to talk. It may already be published this week, but I might have missed it, about what information is required to sign up for this register for the deadline, which is now the 1st of October. Okay, so those are the key points that I wanted to talk about. So that's just kind of setting the scene a little bit. I'll also mention that there's been some we're starting the conference season a little bit. So there's been some conferences taking place, and I wonder sort of what activities you're particularly involved with professionally within your organisations, what initiatives you've taken since the last time we met, and anything else that we need to be aware of that people might want to report about. So over to you if anybody wants to. If you want to speak, do you want to put your hand up, and then because there's quite a few people in the meeting, then we can queue you up one at a time. Thank you, Mike.
Well, actually, I had the privilege of attending the BSR conference last week, so I thought it would be good to just sort of give you some feedback from that, which aligns with many of the things you've just talked about, Alex, to be honest. Competency, again, was very much picked on across the sector as a whole. Interestingly, one of the things that they will be looking at Gateway 2 applications will be the assessment of competencies of individuals submitting applications. So very much seeking to further emphasize the importance of the right people having made the right decisions. I think similar to what you just said, they weren't clear on what was required. They weren't stipulating any requirements. They were just saying you must demonstrate that you are competent. And that was a regular theme actually across the whole of the event. Was they weren't looking to tell you what to do. They were looking to say you have to demonstrate that you've done the right thing. And that was an interesting style. And initially I was quite sort of like, oh crikey, that sounds very much like they're not going to help you. But I think what they're specifically saying is, you know, we're the professionals, we're the competent people with the knowledge. we've got to demonstrate the right information to demonstrate that we're doing our jobs correctly. So very much the right thing.
And I kind of, just reflecting back on that, I think that talks nicely about the way, or reflects well on the way that the health and safety executive have been communicating the process going through the gateways with the regulator about making, not prescribing what they're expected to see from us, but sort of letting us imagine what the standards might be. So
yeah,
I think
us through.
Sorry, go on, George.
Yeah, I was just going to say that I think that also reflects what we've been doing over the last couple of years with the Golden Thread Initiative. Because if you look at, if for example, we ask Alistair to tell us what information's needed for, some of the elements that he's an expert in, and then we get 3 or 4 other people in the room, we'll find that there's different views, and therefore that's part of the challenge, really, that it's down to the context in which something's being considered as to what information you need to know about it. And I think that is a really important part of what this golden thread process needs to be. And I must admit, I'm becoming a little bit. I was talking with Andrew on Wednesday, and there seems to be a view, and I think it's understandable because everybody's under so much pressure. But as long as we've got a document in an electronic folder in the cloud somewhere, that actually we've got it all sorted, and the regulator's going to be happy with that.
Yeah. That was exactly what they were saying, and they didn't really give a monkeys where it was or what it was or how you were holding it. They just said, as long as you can provide us with that information, that's enough.
But the question really, Mike, is what information. So, for example, I'm working through at the moment, helping one of the councils, and we've been going through the information that they've got, and they've got quite a lot of good information. They've got their EWS reports done. They've got fire risk assessments done. They've got a building safety case done as well. But when I then look at them, they're not at all aligned. So the risks that are being suggested, the scenarios that are being suggested in the EWS form document are quite different to the ones that are in the building safety case.
And that's really interesting to hear, because again, the feedback that was also provided was that since Gateway 1 has been applied to planning applications, and obviously that's been running for a while now, they said 56% of applications that have been submitted have had feedback from the regulator at this point already in those early stages. And the vast majority of that feedback has been inconsistency in information that's being provided.
That's helpful.
Yeah.
See, what I think, obviously at one end of the scale, we've got having a full digital twin, everything interconnected and all that sort of stuff, which I have to say I've not yet seen one. But that's one end of the scale. The other end of the scale is obviously just some electronic folders with PDFs in them. Now, I think somewhere in the middle is probably where we need to get to, and we won't be able to do it immediately. Some RPs are far further down that track than others. I mean, Kelly, for example, I think you've been doing a huge amount of work in that area, haven't you? So you've probably got your information in quite in a quite complete way, whereas other people they're just starting on that journey. And what is concerning me at the moment is the lack of people are sort of expecting that the regulator, and that's the other confusion, by the way, there's 2 regulators. There's the fire regulator and there's the building safety regulator, both of which are asking for different levels of detail. But the thing is, it's not really just a matter, as I understand it, of getting through the approval, because what's the likelihood of them actually turning down a safety case report and therefore putting people out on the street, as it were? Possibly, I don't know. Maybe that's an issue, but I think the point is, if something happens, then people are going to want to go into much more detail. I think there's going to be a lot more forensic analysis to try and assign blame if an incident happens, and therefore I think that we need to have an environment in place whereby the information that the specialists that we've been working with over the last couple of years, their information, they're the ones that are probably going to be called in as expert witnesses to see whether housing associations and councils have actually done as much as they could have done to make the building safe. So I'd be interested to understand where we are on that journey.
Got any providers who want to comment on that? Sorry, right, Andrew.
Yeah, I just want to throw in this thing about inconsistencies, and I think it's important that we understand how the building regulator is going to look at things. It's right that an EWS assessment is different from a PAS 9980 assessment, is different from a fire risk assessment, because they are each got a defined way of working. Yeah.
Yep.
The PAS is literally, this is how you will do it. It's for the internal and external. So something like a PAS tends to combine a lot of things and look at it in a larger sense, but it's still constrained by how the PAS is written. You will write it like this and you will do that. I'm being trained by the CIOB as a building safety manager. And actually the guys doing the course are extremely good. The biggest thing I take from that overall, and this I think is solving the picture, solving the problem and seeing the picture the way the regulator's going to see it, which is the biggest thing to think of is your building is a system overall.
Yep.
Don't think of it as, well, I've got a fire alarm panel certificate, I've got an EWS1 certificate. There you are, Mr. Regulator. Everything must be fine, because all these certificates say they're fine because they interact, don't they? Which is what we've been hearing about. Things like, are the dampers in the right wall? Well, the wall's fine, the damper's fine, but actually you put the two together, they don't work. George and I were talking about, and it made me think of a repair that's happening on one of my buildings where, because of safety reasons, someone wants to turn the front door round so it's opened outwards, not inwards. And I thought, well, actually, does that affect the AOV? Is it how the air comes into the building? I'll have to check that. So it's the point is to the overall thing of thinking of the whole building as a system, which has a series of products that work together. I think that's the biggest thing to think of when we're looking at these things together.
That's very helpful to me, because I mean that's the way I've come out of the last couple of years from dealing with people like Stephen there. If you're actually going to look at dampers, you've got to look at it in the context of where they are and what they're doing. And therefore, just having a certificate to say that Swegon have provided an approved item and it's been installed by somebody that's competent, does that really tell you in 3 years' time, 5 years' time, that is the right thing? The other thing, I was talking to a fire risk assessor yesterday, and he was saying that the challenge is that the fire risk assessment, the day after it's been done, if some of the key assets in there fail, the fire risk assessment, the long and short of it, needs to be an ongoing thing. And that's true of the building safety case. So the report itself is just a snapshot in time, but it's in place for 5 years, perhaps. That's the current cycle, I think, isn't it? Yeah, exactly. As Alistair's saying there, compare with an MOT. Yeah. Do you want to say that, Alistair? So
yeah, it's the same with a car MOT. You get a car MOT, and everything's checked out, and as soon as you leave the garage, you hit a pothole, and it affects your steering, and you carry on merrily for the next year until the MOT, and then the MOT says, mate, you've been driving a death trap for the last year because your steering's been damaged. But you're right about the fact the fire risk assessment and the certificate, it is a snapshot in time. Unfortunately, it's the best that we've got, but and hopefully people will, like your car, if you feel there's something wrong with it, then you think, right, I need to get this checked out, and hopefully that people who are maintaining buildings don't just do the once a year thing, that they act on reports that possibly people are giving them, that even the reports that maybe the residents are saying, look, there's something not working here, or there's something that's, the alarm keeps going off every 2 o'clock in the morning, and those are the obvious things. But even things like, the fire door on floor 5 keeps in the corridor keeps sticking. Could someone see about this? So it should be, in an ideal world, an ongoing system. And as Andrew's just said, it's the buildings are a system, and part of that system are the people who actually occupy the building. That everyone really kind of has a responsibility, and it's, if I think it's at the London Underground, if you see something, report it.
Yeah.
Then that, that to a certain extent, maybe even the occupants have a kind of duty of care to help in the running of the building. Because, I mean, let's face it, we're all human. We all have bad days. We all have off days. We all have poor memories. Well, I do. And there's things that fall in between the cracks. That's life. That's the nature of being a human. But it's down to, and it's the old adage, communication, working together, and hopefully then you reduce the probability. I don't think you'll never ever negate any incidents that will happen, but the whole idea, as with construction, is reducing the probability of risks, of hazards. So yeah, you're right about the fire safety case, or the fire certificate. It is like an MOT. It's a snapshot, and it has to be addressed. Brilliant. Thank you, Alistair. Kelly, you've had your hand up for a while. Sorry about that.
No, that's fine. I think I have got a question to throw out, actually. There's something that's interesting that come up, but with regards to kind of the system, yes, the building is a system, and I think it is around the good management of the building. We've already kind of defined our golden thread, our asset information, done our modelling, and kind of on that journey. What we're doing at the moment is writing a in-occupation golden thread management plan, and I think that's what is going to support how we effectively manage our buildings. So we are creating that on the basis of BS 9997, which is obviously what we're accredited to, and helped us towards defining our safety case report and how we wanted to present that. And also it's going to incorporate all of those kind of changes to the building. So we've looked at the wider business, and we've gone out and spoken to the whole business. So it's not just defining our asset information, it's how the business impacts that asset information. So we are putting together a document on how every department has an impact on the building, all the way from finance, not setting the correct budgets or allowing the right money, through to our IT teams who make changes in our system that will actually affect the data in our system, kind of removing parameters, adding parameters in. So putting all of those kind of bits together, like our voids team going in and potentially changing things without informing us. So we're kind of creating this document that brings all of that understanding that the building is a system and we need to know everything. But one of the interesting things that have actually come up for us, so kind of throwing this out, we have a building where we're not the freeholder, but we're ultimately responsible because we've got a full repairing lease. And we're obviously trying to define the PAP, APs within the building. We've additionally have a managing agent that looks after an element of repair of the building, but the owner of the building is actually a church. They have no responsibility at all for communal repairs. Their church is part of our 18-metre building. However, we've gone to a solicitor, and in law, in the Building Safety Act, they are not an AP because they have no responsibility for any communal repairs. Now, we've challenged that, obviously. We've actually had a meeting with the regulator to have a discussion around this, because we're like, the whole point of the Building Safety Act was so that all parties have a responsibility and it works as a system and you have those discussions. But actually, we have got a party that could have a major impact, but because we have to classify them as a commercial unit, they're not an AP. So they have they've got the normal, landlord and tenant act, we can take action like that. But my concern is that we're going to have lots of buildings that are going to have commercial assets in them, and they're not responsible under the Act. I'm really confused by that, and I don't know as a collective what we can do about it. We've had some conversations around the secondary legislation, and they're still saying that commercial assets will sit outside of this. I just don't know if anybody else has had any legal advice or any thoughts on this, but it's kind of quite shocked me, really.
Okay, Gareth, you've got your hand up, and Andrew next.
Yeah, well, we haven't had legal advice, but I've got some thoughts on it. There's a difference between a building system and, say, another, like a different system in another industry, is that the building system is very uncontrolled. You're not going to have full control over the environment, like you just mentioned with the church and stuff. I think there's two things to consider: is what is the impact of not having that control of a church, maybe is on your risk assessment. So how does that impact your fire risk assessment, your structural surveys, trying to capture that within your system risk analysis? So things like the hazard or bow ties, and potentially what controls you could put in place around that, of any sort of service or sort of maintenance that you can do yourselves around the area. But I think it's mainly understanding the impact and of the uncontrolled areas of your system. I don't know if anyone else has any other thoughts as well.
On mute. We'll just go to Andrew next. Put your hand up if you'd like to comment.
As I see it, there sounds like there's three parts. There's there's the church as the owner, and then there's the church as the user of the commercial area. Is that right? So I'd say as owner, they're just a financial owner. So they might be accountable because they might finance the work you do. So there's some link there, but you're probably the principal accountable person, because you're looking after, your job is to look after the building. I believe that the definition comes in is to about how much control or influence they have. So if they're just the owner and go, I hand that all over to you, they have very little control. Therefore, you are the person with the control. So it's all about who has control and who can influence any safety issues. So that covers them as owner, but when they're user of a commercial unit, even if it's the same people, it's sort of as if you think of them as a separate person. The users of the building as part of the church, then we've got buildings like that where we've got community centres at the bottom of our building, things like that are used by other people. We ask them for their fire risk assessment, and equally where we've got leased out ones, those housing associations are asking us for our links. So I think you have to work together, and that's the point. So even if you've got a minor, and it's about proportion, isn't it? So how much is their work or their activities proportionally affecting the building? So effectively all our tenants and leaseholders in a building are also technically really appointable person, because they can affect how the building is, which is why we try and get control back by making sure that they do what they're supposed to do, and we make sure that all our leaseholders know what to do in a fire, how to report it. And Alistair says, they're our eyes and ears in their own building, aren't they? So it's all about getting them to understand that they are responsible. It's tricky, but you have to give them responsibility for the areas they're in, I suppose. That's they can't dodge out of it. Apart as owner, maybe they could, but not as users of the building.
Yeah, I mean, I'm totally comfortable with us having working relationships and understanding what they do, what we do, making sure that we have the right information in place. It's just not what I expected, that we would have people that have a large interest in the building that we couldn't define as an AP, because then that puts more onus on them, that they have to understand their responsibilities within the Act, rather than us potentially taking action against them through different regulations, rather than say the regulator looking at them. It's just the responsibility of looking at us. It just seems a bit wrong to me. I get the change in here is having that working relationship with everybody, and like I said, I don't have a concern with that. It's just there should be that responsibility within the law on everybody that takes over, part of that building. It includes customers, totally get that. But when you've got somebody that's potentially creating kind of a risk, a church to me is kind of a risk underneath an 18-metre plus building. It's just seems a bit weird that they're not kind of bound by the same law as what we're going to be. Sorry, just my thoughts on that. It's very odd.
Okay, thank you for that. That's been a very interesting discussion. Has anybody got any more views on the matters about commercial assets and ownerships of that
Yeah,
sort?
I mean, I don't know. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Dave.
Good. Yeah. I'm in the office, so it's a bit noisy here. That's why I haven't got the camera on. Yeah, I'll put a couple of things in the chat, because we've got a couple of things. Funny enough, George is aware of this. We've got some buildings with British Land where one of them in particular, we have responsibility for the internal communal areas, but they have responsibility for the external structure. So as far as we're concerned, they're the principal accountable person. Whether they're going to agree with that, we're making sure we've got every legal document that we can possibly find to make that point. But funnily enough, two adjacent buildings, we actually have responsibility for the external structure as well. So we consider ourselves the principal accountable person. Having said that, we can't actually make any changes to the structure without getting the okay from them. So it's quite weird. But it is what it is. But the other thing is even given that in some cases we're not the principal accountable person, we still have to contribute to the safety case and to the safety case report, because they will be relying on us as an accountable person to, from the perspective of claims, argument, evidence, to provide them with the evidence that we're managing the bits that we're responsible for correctly. So we still don't get away with just going, hey, we don't have anything to do with the safety case or the safety case report because we're not the principal accountable person. As an accountable person, we are still going to be responsible for elements. And as an example of that, funnily enough, we have a high-risk building which is part of a football stadium. So the principal accountable person who is responsible for the structure is actually the football club. but there is no way that that football club would have any idea of how to do a safety case, or or get the evidence together and create the safety case report. So in actual fact, we've done all of that work. So we've done the structural surveys, the fire surveys, and the engineers' reports, put together where all the information is on the building, ostensibly written the safety case report, and will be managing the safety case, because 99.9% of the data is within our domain. But we still, in theory, are not going to be the principal accountable person on that, because the football club, manages the external structure of that building, because it is part of the stadium. So that's just my 2 pence there. So I agree with everyone that said that it isn't a clear, black and white line between a principal accountable person and an accountable person. It's very much looking at what your original leases were, where those responsibilities lie, and then convincing the other party that they need to take on that role. So. But also, I've included a link there that to the building safety campaign.gov.uk, which you may have already seen anyway. But in there, it does sort of have a brief blurb about the difference between accountable and principal accountable persons. So that's it.
Okay, very helpful. Thank you, Dave. George.
Yeah, I was just going to ask what people's perception is of the responsibility and the accountability and the liability that's coming out of this, because obviously the whole point about the Building Safety Act was to take it away from a situation where people could just pass the parcel. And the original idea was that it was going to be a person, a named person, that was going to be responsible, and that now seems to have changed to being the organisation can be accountable. I don't think it's necessary now. I may have that wrong, but I don't think it's necessary now to actually have it as an individual. Now I can understand the logic of that, because obviously, even if it's somebody like the chief executive of the or the director of asset management or something like that of an RP, what happens when that person moves? Yeah. Where does the liability sit for something that was delivered, during the previous person's tenure? How do you actually go through and ensure that the new person that's coming in, basically, how would that person know what type of liability they were taking on? I was talking with Andrew the other when we were discussing this the other day, and obviously, because they've changed the rules on the building safety manager's role as a formal role, I think what Andrew said was that the principal accountable person is probably a senior person, but they then delegate the responsibility down to technical people, and those technical people may well then delegate the responsibility out to consultants who have advised them. So it seems to me that the line of responsibility doesn't seem to be there. I don't know what would you say, Paul? You're involved in this from the cross perspective. Do you think that it's clear? Paul Bray, sorry.
Sorry. Is this about the accountable person? I don't believe it is. It is as clear as it should be. The whole definition around principal person is something that's up for conjecture, I think. But I'm hoping that the regulator will make it clearer as we get closer to October. That's really where. Well, let's not wait until October before it gets clear. But my whole concern, my original understanding of the term principal accountable person was that's where there's more than one person involved in responsibility for the management of the building. But I'm being given different definitions from different sources now, and the principal accountable person can be one entity within one building and the only entity, but that isn't my original understanding of that. I am shocked by what Kelly said about persons not being able to be accountable, even though they're part of that building, and probably could be abrogating a responsibility for or some kind of liability within the control of that building. But that's where I sit. I still think there's lots to learn. I was also it was interesting to get some of the updates from the building safety regulators meeting that occurred last week, and from what I saw on Twitter as well, it demonstrated that I don't think the building safety regulator really knows too much about what's going to be happening in the next few months, and that's concerning for us as we're trying to pull our safety cases together and making sure that we've got the right information. Have we got 6 months after October the 1st, or have we got 28 days to get everything together? That's one of the things that's concerning me, because that time's ticking away really quickly. We're in April now, or we're a couple of days away from April, tomorrow, and we'll all find that time will pass really quickly into October. But that's where just a few of my thoughts.
Thanks, Paul. Dave, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, no, just echoing sort of what both George and Paul said. I mean, my understanding was originally it was going to be a named person, and then as a result of the consultation, they backed off on a named person, probably for the reasons that George pointed out, like who would want that job? And those people would move around, so they then changed it to become an organizational entity rather than a named person, so it was a named organization. So I think they kept the original naming convention of calling it principal accountable person, because the original idea was it was going to be an individual, but that's now changed. But you're right, from the point of view of, and going back to what Kelly said, that there is, particularly a lot of the onus they've got at the moment is around trying to tie down new developments and get that working, which is why I think, from what my understanding was, that most of the secondary legislation that we're expecting in April, a lot of that has been tied down to dealing with new developments rather than existing builds. But it will be a case of, in theory, you'll get 6 months from, sort of April to get your house in order and be ready to meet the legislation and start, and have your buildings all registered and stuff by October, which is a really tight turnaround, given what we've seen with, we're dealing with the Fire Safety Act and what we needed to get done by January, which I know a lot of people probably still haven't got all that done yet, let alone, dealing with the Building Safety Act stuff. But yeah, as I said, I think that one of the things that needs to be considered, particularly with new developments, is making sure you've got those leases tied up so that when the thing's actually being built, you've already, tied down who is going to be the principal accountable person and who are just going to be accountable people, and what they're responsible for providing to contribute to the safety case. And that's going to be a step change where, and this is why we're struggling with particularly buildings that, were old Section 106s or things like that, that information was never put in place in the first place. So we're retrospectively trying to convince people that they need to take on this role as principal accountable person, or even get them to take on the role of accountable person, so that they supply us information on what they're doing with that building, so that informs our holistic safety case, and then feeds into the safety case report.
Okay, thanks, George.
Yeah, I was just going to ask Mike and Callum, for example, who are probably more heavily involved in the delivery side of things. What do you think the practical sanction is going to be at Gateway 2, for example, or indeed Gateway 3, if the information isn't adequate to demonstrate that the building is safe? Do you envisage a risk of delays?
it's a good question, George. The understanding from the conference was that the 12-week turnaround for a Gateway 2 approval will be met as long as the information provided is sufficient. So again, they're being a little bit clever in that wording. So what they're saying is, if we submit the right amount of information that covers all the, that shows that we've done our due diligence and met our legislatory requirements, then they will honour that 12-week period. What they're saying is, if you provide poor information or information that has gaps or weaknesses in it, they won't commit to that 12 weeks. So it's in your best interest to do that. So again, I don't have a problem with that. I think it's very clever, and I think what they're hinting at there is, if you do everything well and you do things to the right level and you provide the information and the correct information, then they'll let you go and crack on with it. What they're probably going to do is identify difficult buildings. I think they'll also probably start to identify, I hate to call it a blacklist, but let's call it a blacklist for argument's sake, sort of identify people who they feel they're more concerned about, and maybe focus their attention on those people and those clients and those developers, rather than maybe ones that they know are doing the right thing and making the commitment to try and improve those things.
I think George, from my point of view, I would say that the 12-week period, it's not very helpful having 12 weeks from the end of a project where you've got maintenance to carry out. The amount of defects that could occur in that 12-week period, unless you do the standstill maintenance, is quite a concern. And I think we've probably gone back with those concerns to try and reduce that period. I've got no doubt we won't have any success there. But I don't know what anybody else thinks, but it just seems a bit of a long.
And that's at Gateway 3.
Yeah.
Yeah, but Gateway 2 as well.
Yeah, well, it just seems excessively long periods. But I guess that's borne out of the fact that they probably haven't got enough staff at the moment to staff this up as well. I mean, we know that the amount of information that's getting submitted, that there's no security management on that across the fire and rescue services at the moment. I don't know if anybody's on LinkedIn connected up to Matt Hodges Long, who's done some work to review that those systems, and it's quite shoddy at the moment. So I think we're on hiding to nothing at the moment, because we're not getting much guidance. And if you found to have done something that's maybe not quite right, the onus is on us to pay the consequences of that.
Yeah, the team that we've got, the Tier 1 team, the BIM4Housing major contractors team, they've identified a couple of things this last couple of weeks that I think are relevant. So if I just show you what I mean by that, they've raised this. Sorry. So this thing about a major change. So this comes around to the point about how complete the design needs to be before you start building. And my understanding is that what they're asking, or what they're requiring, is that key things like sprinklers, smoke dampers, fire doors, etc., need to have been specified before construction starts, because that needs to be then considered during the construction process. If you then change from one type of smoke damper to another, then that would be expected to take up to 6 weeks to approve. So that's over and above the 12 weeks that you're talking about there.
And who picks up the cost for those delays?
Well, it's it's value engineering, isn't it? So maybe it would discourage people from making changes, which largely is what I think most people think should be happening anyway. That the design, I mean, in any other industry, you wouldn't start building it until you've completed the design.
George, just to pick up on that, I'm guessing your query there was about at Gateway 2 prior to commencing construction?
Yes.
I think there was a little bit more movement on that at the conference last week, in which what they were saying was they've recognised that they will probably also look at conditional approvals on certain packages of work which they recognise they won't be able to complete the design requirements until they've engaged with the supply chain at that point. So, and funny enough, sprinklers was one of the ones that was raised. So I think what they will be looking for is, let's say you submit your Gateway 2 application and you have a sprinkler system. They would expect at Gateway 2 you to say, we are installing a sprinkler system, we will be complying with regulation X, Y, and Z. This is our requirements, but the final details of the design will be completed by the specialist subcontractor when engaged and when appointed. What I think they will then start to do is see that they want that completed design information to be submitted, and as long as it's in line with those requirements and regulations, there shouldn't be any issues. What would be an issue is if that submitted design didn't meet the criteria that you'd set out at Gateway 2, and therefore they would raise concern about why changes have been made, not information that supports the approach you're taking.
Yeah, the knock-on impact of that, though, Mike, as I understand it, and Callum would, we've been talking with Balfour Beatty about this, is that the problem comes from the design of the architecture and, for example, the compartmentation, and where builders' work holes go. So if the selection of products is going to be left until after the all of the dry lining's already been installed and the prepared holes are already there, my understanding is it's very, very common that the new M&E design goes through and breaches the compartmentation. So that introduces a whole range of different issues that probably people like Hilti have to sort out.
Yeah, and I think again that's what they're probably. I still think they're looking to address that. So I still think they're saying, look, at Gateway 2, we would expect you to have your compartmentation strategy and your fire requirements and your systems, but there may be a couple of specialist areas that will follow the principles and design approaches you're taking, but you may not have the drawings or information that substantiate fully that solution. When that information then comes along, that should follow everything that you'd previously agreed at Gateway 2. So there shouldn't be any surprises. It's more just the information to, your record drawings, for want of a word, I'm guessing, is what they're seeking. What they're looking not to accept is if all of a sudden you submit a Gateway 2 with your compartmentation strategy, and then 6 months into the build, you change that, that's when they're going to ask more questions. So they're going to say, why have you changed your compartmentation strategy? What rationale did you have for that change? That's where I think you're going to raise more questions and queries.
Thank you. What would your view be on that, Stephen?
Sorry, I was on mute. The risk always with this is that even if you haven't changed your strategy, but you're just changing your supplier of product, they're not interchangeable generally. So if you've already had holes precast for a smoke control damper from supplier A, even if your strategy hasn't changed, your classification requirements haven't changed, but you now buy from supplier B, the holes may no longer be suitable. And you can't just expect someone like Hilti to come up with some additional penetration seal solution, because if it's not tested, then you've no longer got a compliant product, whether that's from a smoke control or a compartmentation perspective. Most of the manufacturers have got all their data should be available straight away in terms of things like hole sizes, wall materials, penetration seals. So that isn't any information that you should be waiting from a product manufacturer. They should have that already available now.
Okay, Mike, you've got your hand up, but I think that might be left over from the last one, unless you're responding, and then we'll go to Alistair. Okay, Alistair next.
Yeah, Stephen makes a good point there, because even when it gets down to smaller details, because for years and for decades, for example, fire stopping has always been regarded as it's just one of those things, we'll get done, we'll get done. But Stephen's right in that if, say for example, not just in terms of smoke control dampers or any kind of dampers, even if they change the fire stopping, it's not necessarily the case that going from manufacturer A to manufacturer B, it's just a straight swap, because manufacturers do have different approvals and different levels of approvals, different scopes of approval, and that even does come down to even the type of hole, the size of hole, and certainly one way of leaving that, and what we're trying to alleviate is that we actually have a, for example, BIM for fire stopping program, which actually dictate or specifies the size of holes you need for the type of service, so that all of that is pre-planned, all of that is in place, and if it just then comes down to we want to change to some other supplier, then that will have an effect. That will have to be a consideration, and in my view, that would be down as almost a major change, because the way I've been viewing this in terms of what is a major change and what's not is the basic question: can this have an ultimate effect on the safety case or the safety of the occupants of the property? And if you have chosen the wrong fire stop and the fire stop is not approved or tested for an application, well, the consequences of that is it's going to fail, and you're not going to achieve your compartmentation, and therefore it then starts kicking all up the chain. So that's the point I was just wanting to make.
Would anybody on the landlord side like to comment on that? Maybe Glenn? Glenn Jackson? Are you there?
Gareth's got his hand up.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Yeah.
I was going to ask a question though. I just wanted to know if there was a full fire risk analysis in place before construction for Gateway 2, because that's something that could be reviewed if you had to change your supplier to understand the impact of the changes on your fire controls. So I just because we've been mainly working with landlords that are for buildings in occupation or legacy buildings. So I wanted to know a bit more on the construction side.
I think the fundamental point here, Gareth, is that the way the industry works currently is that they leave everything as late as they possibly can to allow as much flexibility as they can, and that is largely there to manage and reduce commercial risk. But actually, everything that we've been told over the last I've been told over the last probably 20 years is the earlier you make the decisions as to what products and materials you go in the building, you reduce the risk of a failure. So we've got a tension there between the commercial side of things that wants to leave things as late as possible, and then you've got the other side, which is trying to make the right decisions, as it were. And I'm interested to just feel where the tensions are on that at the moment. Is there anybody else on the landlord side that would have a view on that? Perhaps not.
So I'm just going to say a couple of things. I think that we're having a discussion about buildings under construction, but obviously I don't know the actual number, but let's say 99% of all buildings already exist, right?
Yeah.
So there's a very small number actually being built at the moment. We've got potentially tens of thousands, certainly thousands of buildings, high-risk buildings that need to go into this register and go through the process, which are existing buildings. I'm just wondering how this group can help with helping organisations who need to go through this registration process. But registration is almost, in my mind, it's something we have to deal with. But the issue is how we're delivering occupied safe buildings. It's all well and good talking about specifying things being built during the construction phase, but how are people approaching retro buildings, going in and establishing what you've actually got deployed? I'm just fascinated by this general topic. How destructive are we being about our buildings? My journey towards BIM started just after the Grenfell Tower in that summer, the Grenfell Tower fire in that summer, when I saw Brent O'Hanrahan, who's now running some building safety training programs. Brent, who was then the Hyde Housing compliance manager, or possibly director of asset management, talking at the CIH conference, saying the day after the tower fire, he'd been asked by the chief executive, how many buildings have they got of that type, and have they got that cladding on those buildings? And his immediate reaction was, I don't know how many buildings I've got of any type, and I certainly don't know anything about cladding. And in the 6 months or year after that, they went out and established which buildings they had people in and started sampling some insulation systems, some cladding systems, and only later on in the process discovered that they'd been removing and sampling cladding from buildings that they didn't own, which kicks us back to the responsibilities idea, looking at the accountable people and the principal accountable person, which I must admit is the first time I've heard perhaps being talked about. I need to keep abreast of my documentation today. So I suppose the question is, how can we as a group help with, or from the BIM angle, I'm trying to bring this back to BIM, to talk about information standards for new build, which I think is a very big challenge, but potentially more easily controlled because we've got gateways to go through, and existing buildings where we might not have information about stuff that's built into the walls of buildings or buried under concrete. So there's some challenges there for us. Andrew, you've got your hand up.
Mic on would help. Yes, and there's another thing. I had a similar question from my development officer who said, oh, if in theory we accept a new build that's been built by someone else and we might be given it effectively to manage, what information etc do we need, and what's the process, and how's it going to work? And so I tried to explain some of the processes, and at the same time asking, well, it depends where they are with the build process as well, none of which came back exactly because it was all theoretical really. But what I had to throw in there as well was, don't forget also, just to make it even more confusing, the builder is going to be concentrating on the Building Safety Act. Soon as it gets through Gateway 3 and it gets handed over to us as landlord, we then have to apply the fire safety order. And if that isn't fed into the ERs so that the builder builds it right. So for instance, not terribly worrying, but it's something should be done. You need a PIB box installed on the ground floor, and you need fire signs telling you which flats are on what floors. Now, those things are not in the Building Safety Act, as this is required for a building. It's under the fire safety orders. So, are we missing some information that makes sure that on day one, yes, it's past the Building Safety Act, great. Now, hang on, I have to go up and put a load of signs up before I can even open this building.
Yeah.
Are all of the steps, or all the hurdles actually being covered? So there's another thing to throw in. And does the Building Safety Act include all the things that are in the fire safety order that are required as well? Because there'll be this argument where the builder will say, well, it passes it passes building control. It's always been the answer. Well, building control passed it, and they'll go, yeah, but you haven't done this, and you haven't done that, and you haven't done this, and I now need to do that, and I haven't got any money because you're giving me a finished building, but you haven't finished it. So there's another one to throw in.
Yeah, I think it's, for me, that's, sorry, Mike will come to you in a second, but that's COBE. That's the point at which COBE kicks in. It's the construction to operations building information exchange. At that point, we're looping back going, we need to know where are the signs, where's the PID. That's information that we need to know. And they might be going, well, we can't hand over the building till we've done this. So it's in the spec. But yeah.
But so just to, I'm sorry to just jump in on that, but the key thing there, Alex, is what's in that COBE file. Yeah, because you can't assume that what's going to come out is going to be in the COBE, because you need to define what's going to be in the COBE. That's why the asset information requirements are so critical. So, for example, signage. If you were asking for a building, the Balfour Beatty wouldn't typically provide you in their COBE information with signage. Now, it's absolutely logical that it should be there, right? But unless you put it in, then you wouldn't know. Exactly the same with attributes against elements as well, because COBE, in its most basic form, will basically just tell you who the manufacturer is, what the model number is, it's probably its life cycle. It might not even tell you where it is. Yeah, it'll probably give you a space, but spaces are quite big. So if you don't know where it is, but you certainly wouldn't know, for example, from standard COBE, if there is such a thing, what the fire rating is of a door, because unless you actually specify it in your AIR, it won't be included.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. Things like we should be aiming from the beginning to number doors using, a standard numbering format. So, but that's not necessarily in the Building Safety Act. Again, that's something that we should be asking for up front. So when we start, we can go, right, we know exactly what doors where, we know the name of the numbers. That's useful because that's useful for all sorts of other stuff. And then, yeah, put it all together. But you're right, I think we need to ask for these things up front, because they're often or pretty much free to provide if you ask for them up front, and it's all part of the process. Yeah, if you ask for it afterwards, they'll go, oh no, we need all that. We need to go round and find that. Well, I think there are gaps, and I think this is where, as end users on my side, I'm going to be saying, am I going to receive all the information I'm expecting to receive? So I have to ask for it, I suppose, at the early stage. And it's tricky when I'm going to receive a building from someone. I think when I'm looking at existing buildings, I'll probably have a budget for it. I'm going round at the moment, for instance, putting floor level and floor location signs up because we haven't got them. Therefore, I've got a budget. But if I'm receiving a building that's new, I think my bosses would assume that everything would be there, and I shouldn't need to start spending money on it straight away.
Yeah.
So I think being sure that everything, not just Building Safety Act, but Fire Safety Order, which of course doesn't apply until it's occupied. And that's the tricky bit. We have to remember that things like a SIB box or a PIB box, on the ground floor isn't necessarily part of the build, but we do need to ask for them, and signs and exits and stuff like that. And then plans are in a way. So the plans, for instance, we might be given, this is another thing about information, might get given full set drawing plans, 200 billion bits of information on them electronically. Yeah, but what the fire brigade need is a very basic drawing.
Yes.
So while it's being done, we can say, can we have, similar layout plans, a bit like the fire alarm plans, very simple, basic, clear ones that are suitable for the SIB box, because that's required. So there's lots of other things I think we need to fill gaps on.
But on that point, from a BIM perspective, I would say, Andrew, rather than end up with another silo of drawings that are that's a matter of just layering or switching levels of detail off.
It is, yes, and of course, if it's drawn with the right layers, that's fine. You just switch off. But half the time, you switch off fire alarm, and you lose the whole lot. And actually, what you want is the zone bit of the fire alarm, not the location of every detector bit of the fire alarm.
And that's why the BIM bit is important. Sorry,
Yeah.
Mike.
Yeah.
No, it's all right. To be honest, you were saying a lot of things that I was going to say anyway, but I was just trying to follow on from Alex's sort of suggestion about how we try and move these things forward, and actually just try and sweep up some of your points there. So good quality EIRs, good quality AIRs, good quality OIRs, all of those key information documents. If we get given them at the start of a project, then delivering all that information is very easy. There's no problem with us producing fire plans or segregated drawings or signage information. All of those things are well within our grasp, and we can deliver that. And that can be in the form of physically modeled objects, or it can be in data or in code. You know, any of those requirements, we can do that. What we still typically find is that information at the start of the projects isn't clear enough. And that's where half the problem starts, is that initial information. I think, however, I've spent many years in the ISOs and looking at those processes, and the more and more you get to know them, the more and more you realise that they are actually very sensible in what they ask, and they are very sensible in the mechanisms to do the right thing. The challenge is continuing the education to make people aware of why you need to go through those stepping stones to get the right information out at the end. So that for me is a real key one. Common data environments. I still think there's a huge improved market in terms of common data environments, making it very clear at the onset whether clients have a common data environment that they're using, and that horrible word that I never pronounce, the interoperability between common data environments to try and get them to talk to each other, really, really important. And the last one is the perception about difference between new and old buildings. For me, I don't think it makes any difference. Newer buildings are probably easier because you're building information and you're collecting it in, and you're starting from afresh. But you probably already have some existing information that you have to gain, because typically there is a site with some information that already exists anyway. If you're recladding an existing building, it's just got different constraints, but they're the same, I think, regardless of. I think it's a mindset shift.
Okay, thank you, Mike. Very good. Right. Okay, so we've got 15 minutes remaining in the meeting, and I love a well-run meeting. So are there any other points that people want to talk about, or do we want to talk about next steps? What have we got, any takeaways, good takeaways from this session? George?
Yeah, I was just going to mention, as we discussed this morning, the NEMA, which is the new name for the UK BIM Alliance, has got a stand at the. They're running a stand at Digital Construction Week, which is towards the end of May, third week of May. Now, last year we were able to secure some tables, and we ran a live roundtable workshop where we had about 40 people come along and be working actively on a particular topic. And I've put a proposal forward to them this year to try and do the same again. So if you'd be interested, I know Alex came and ran the operations one last time. If you're interested, then or you've got colleagues that might be willing to come, I'd like to throw that out there. We've also got an event on the 12th of April in London, an in-person event that's actually being organised by Cambridge University, and it's again it's around the delivery of the Building Safety Act and the like. So if you're interested, then you could come along to that. That's in I think it's around Farringdon. I'm not quite sure actually, but if you're interested, drop your name in the chat and we'll get you along.
Okay, so Digital Construction Week is 17th and 18th of May at Excel in London. It was quite a good event last week. Well, last year.
Yeah, I think it coincides with Firex as well, like it did last year.
It did.
Yeah, it does.
As well, yeah.
So I can do 2 in one day. It's fine.
Fantastic. Yeah. Of course, you joined it as well, didn't you, Steve?
Yes, I did. Yeah.
Now. Yeah. It was a good session, wasn't it?
It was. Yeah.
I'm up on the 17th, George. Happy to participate.
Excellent.
Okay. Right. Have we got any other points we want to talk about? Oh, I'm very badly organised for this meeting today. I would normally announce at this point the date of the next meeting, but I don't know if we've actually got that in the diary. Okay, people expressing interest on chat. I don't know if Jiss is on the call or if anybody, anyone else knows what we've arranged. It's normally 3 months.
The next meeting, shouldn't you?
I should have. I'm just trying to look for it.
No, sorry, I was saying Jiss should.
Oh, Jiss should. Right. Okay. Sure he has.
He's hurt his hand, so he perhaps can't read.
No, that's fine. That's okay. Oh, okay, fair enough. Maybe you can't unmute.
Sorry about that.
No, fine. That's okay. No problem at all. So that's fine. So look out in your diaries for that. Looks like we'll get together at DCW or Firex or Cambridge event. Which
Sorry, can I just interrupt on that? The Cambridge event is primarily for SMEs.
Well, most of the people on this are probably SMEs.
In that case, that's fine then.
Yeah, it's less than 250 employees. Yeah.
That cuts me out, unfortunately. But okay, I won't see you at Cambridge. I'm going to go to Oxford instead. No.
Well, I'm not sure how rigorous that is anyway, but
okay, that's fine. It's okay. It's all good. Mike, you've got your hand up still. Is that from previous comments, or have you got final?
Sorry.
That's fine. Go ahead.
Must drop the hand after I spoke.
Oh, I see. Right. Okay. That's fine. No problem. Just want to make sure everybody's voice is heard appropriately. Okay, so I think without, unless I think I've given plenty of opportunities for people to mention if there's anything else you want to talk about or put forward. So we'll get 10 minutes back in the day, shall we? If that's okay with everybody. Thank you very much for your contributions. I promise the next one will be much better run. And yeah, over to George for final words.
Yeah, I was just going to ask if anybody's interested in looking at this area of aligning the risks and the hazard side of things. So if I just explain what I mean by that, looking at this building safety, this EWA report, sorry, the safety case report, you'll see that what we've got in this one is, let's say, smoke in a flat breaking out, and the measures that are in place and the assets that are in place that are there to protect it. Yeah. If we then go to the EWS report, that has got similar types of breakdowns, but they're described differently. Sorry, let me just see where that is. I thought I prepared this, so sorry for this. But the point is that they've got similar hazards. Here we are. Yeah, so fire in a room, and this has been described differently, obviously, but it's been decided because that consultant has interpreted it that way. Now, my thought is what you would want as a landlord is to say this risk happens, therefore I'd want to know from my EWS report and for my building safety report and for my fire safety report or my fire risk assessment, whether the measures that are in place are going to be there, protecting us. So, what's the relationship, for example, between the smoke vent system and that? Would you agree that would be a useful thing to try and align? And if so, would you be interested in spending, an hour or so with me just going through and talking about that. Deafening silence.
Yeah, I'd say it's very useful because a lot of things when we work with landlords, they have the FRAs, they have the EWSs, they have other surveys as well. And what we're trying to do with them is capture that information within a hazard identification and then turn that into a building risk register that can be maintained over the life cycle of the building. So I can see gains from being able to leverage the initial documents they have to do through statutory means, so that far FRAs, and then implement that within the hazard analysis, either bow ties or hazard, which have been mentioned by the building safety regulator. There's obviously many other methods as well, but we'll probably stick with them. So yeah, I think it's something that's very useful.
Any volunteers?
Yeah, I'll help with that, Andrew.
Thank you, Andrew. Yeah, good.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just thinking that's similar to, I don't know, the boards, for instance, will say, what's our most hazardous building? Well, it depends which report you're reading. So yeah, trying to pull things together is actually quite important.
Yeah, because if for example, they may, all three of them may reference a smoke vent, but they'll use different terminology to describe it, and it's in my view, it would make a lot more sense for, if a smoke vent fails, what's the impact on the EWS view, the fire view, and also the building safety view. That just would make a lot more sense, I think. Good.
Let's work through it.
Okay, thank you very much for your contributions today. I think it's been a very interesting discussion. I've certainly learned a lot. I've made at least 5 learning points on my thing, which is more than I usually get from most of my meetings. So really very much appreciated, and I hope that we've learned something from each other as well. See you around in the real world or at the next meeting. Stay safe, everybody.
Thanks,
Cheers.
Thank you.
Cheers, Alex.
Cheers.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Bye.
Alex.
Thanks.
Cheers.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.